Go ahead.
Presenting, we have Seigetsu Roger Cochran speaking about the Three Refuges and the Three Pure Precepts. So we'll hand the session over to Seigetsu. Again, everyone, this is our Dharma roundtable discussion. And Seigetsu, Gasho, welcome.
Okay, thank you, Satsu. Well, I'm going to talk about the refuges and the precepts, or at least some of these. And this is a fascinating area, something that I think I've taken for granted in understanding, but as I was asked to dig deeper into it, I realized how much greater depth there was than I had previously understood. So we usually start each meeting of the Sangha, for most of our Sanghas, with chanting the Three Refuges. I take refuge in Buddha. I take refuge in Dharma. I take refuge in Sangha. I take refuge in Buddha, the fully awakened one. I take refuge in Dharma, the compassionate teaching. I take refuge in Sangha, the harmonious community. I have completely taken refuge in Buddha. I have completely taken refuge in Dharma. I have completely taken refuge in Sangha. What is refuge anyway? It's shelter, it's sanctuary, it's protection from difficulty. And it turns out that this idea of refuge is something that we find in a place that I had not expected it. There's a Catholic version of refuge, not the first place I would have looked. But what this says is that refuge is vastly different from shelter. Refuge is deeper, it's scarier. The stakes are higher when you need refuge. Shelter is from temperatures dropping and the chance of rain. You can probably make it through without shelter. But without refuge, you're vulnerable and truly alone. Refuge is wind blowing through the cedars as far as they will bend, thunder that jolts you, and an absolutely black night that has suddenly fallen. And you're running toward home. The need for it is deeper in the body. When you find shelter, you can calmly peer out. But the need for refuge makes you look within. A Buddhist point of view, Robert Thurman, who I hope many of us are familiar with, he says of the three jewels, remember that awakening, freedom from suffering, salvation, if you will, liberation, omniscience, Buddhahood, all come from your own understanding, your insight into your own reality. It cannot come just from the blessing of another, from some magical empowerment, from some sort of secret gimmick, or from membership in a group. So refuge, something that we start each meeting with, is an important part of our practice. To take refuge is to seek shelter from difficulty, even from great difficulty. Refuge is a protection from three difficulties that we often encounter: greed, anger, and delusion. And we can experience these in our daily life, in our work, in our relationships, in our environment, in ongoing changes that we've met with and experienced with COVID-19 and other experiences that are beyond our control. What is the difference of the refuge provided by the Buddha from that of Dharma or from Sangha. Refuge in Buddha is trust that we're not being led astray by a false teacher. So this is reliance on our experience, our personal experience in what the Buddha has had to tell us. Refuge in Dharma is what we learn in the teaching of the Buddha. It's what exists in the world of objects and in things in their relationship to each other. That's the Dharma. Sangha, refuge in Sangha. This is the community of others who are trying to use the Buddha's teaching in their daily life and in the relationships with others who have undertaken a similar effort. So let's look now at the Pure Precepts. Could we show slide 3? Thank you. The Pure Precepts, the 3 Pure Precepts, are first to do no evil or to do no harm. Evil is something that we create through the 3 poisons of greed, anger, and delusion. So to do no evil is to avoid attachments. An attachment is to see someone or something as separate from ourselves. To do only good. This is to avoid selfish motivations in our interactions, to avoid greed, anger, and delusion, and to save all sentient beings. That is, to embrace and sustain all beings, live to benefit all beings. And in tempestuous times of politics and wars and illness, embracing all sentient beings can be a difficult task for us. So the first precept that I named, to do no evil, what is it to not create evil? Basically, if we follow the 4 noble truths, we will be on a path to not creating evil. First noble truth is that life is suffering. Now, this is a translation that's caused me a lot of trouble in the past, suffering, because it's often difficult to say that what's going on is suffering. And I've been called out by people that I've spoken to about suffering who say, I don't suffer. But turns out, as I've looked at it, this Pali word, dukkha, being translated as suffering, is probably a very inaccurate translation. It seems to actually mean something like incapable of satisfying, or not able to bear or withstand anything. So if we think of dukkha not as suffering, but as something that can't satisfy us, our needs, or even replace suffering with the word stressful, we may get closer to what was intended by these early writers, these early translators. The second noble truth teaches us that the cause of suffering or unsatisfactoriness is greed or desire. The actual word in the early scriptures is tanha, which seems to be better translated as thirst or craving. So suffering arising from greed, things we don't have, or suffering arising from anger, not getting things that we want, or delusion, the delusion that we deserve what we want and don't have. These are sources of suffering, greed, anger, and delusion. We search for something outside ourselves to make us happy, We do this a lot, I think, at least I do, but no matter how successful we are, we never remain completely satisfied. The second truth is not telling us that we should give up everything that we love to find happiness. The meaning here seems to be more subtle. It's the attachment to what we desire that gets us into trouble. The third noble truth teaches us that grasping for one ephemeral thing after another never satisfies us for long, because everything's impermanent, everything changes. It's only when we see that things continually change and we see it and understand it for ourselves that we can begin to stop grasping. If we do this, we see that impermanence is permanent, so to speak, then letting go is easier. The craving will disappear or at least diminish on its own. And the fourth noble truth, the Buddha, like a physician, prescribes treatment for our illness, treatment for our greed, anger, and delusion. This is the Eightfold Path. Unlike many other religions, Buddhism doesn't have a particular benefit to merely believing in the doctrine. Instead, Buddhism asks us to actually live the doctrine and to walk the path. Every action of our body, speech, and mind is addressed in one way or another by the Eightfold Path. And it's interesting that the Eightfold Path, with its 8 points, is something that directs us in 3 different directions. There's 3 really interrelated paths. There's the Prajna path, the wisdom path, which asks us to have right view or right understanding. It's insight into the nature of things as they are, into the first 3 noble truths: the nature of suffering or unsatisfactoriness, the cause of our unsatisfaction, dissatisfaction, and the way to cease this dissatisfaction. So the wisdom path is really right intention or right thought. And the intention is to realize our own enlightenment. Second path is an ethical path. This consists of right speech or kind speech, that is, speech that's truthful, doesn't have malice, speech that promotes harmony or understanding. I could wish we had some of this in our political life. Another part of the ethical path is right or good action. This is action that arises from compassion. Compassion is when we suffer with someone, not when we pity them. Suffering with someone is, as it says, to be with them, to sense their own suffering. And if we can, to bring some relief to that suffering. Pity, on the other hand, is a superior position. We're looking down on someone. Compassion is a position of equality. And then the third part of this ethical path is right livelihood, or maybe for our days, attentive livelihood. This is work that doesn't compromise the precepts and doesn't harm anyone. The third path in the Eightfold Path is the mental discipline path, or samadhi path. This is right effort or diligence, that is, personally developing wholesome qualities. Right mindfulness, becoming aware of in our body and mind of the present moment and being aware of ourselves and of others. and then of right meditation or right concentration, which is what we've just been doing. It's Zazen. So how do we do good for others? What is it to practice good? Well, it's following the Eightfold Path. How do we save all sentient beings? This is a question for us to consider. How do we save all sentient beings? How do we actualize good for others? And how is this different from practicing good? So that's my take on the Three Refuges and the Three Pure Precepts. And if we could, can we get sorted into 2 discussion groups so that we can have some conversation about our personal experiences with the refuges and the precepts?
Yep, that's right. So Cosette, did you want to go, just kind of, we'll spend some time to chat on the next steps. So Cosette will put in the questions. Hold on, let me get you off of the spotlight so I can see everybody. Yeah. All right, so what's going to happen now is we're going to have an interactive discussion in breakout rooms about the mini Dharma talk that Seigetsu just had. So Cosette, did you want to, is there anything that you wanted to say related to the breakout rooms?
So let me just second here. I'm going to post. So what we've done, the breakout room is for you to discuss within a group. Again, part of what we've heard before you want to do is more group discussion within the Sangha. So this is the opportunity to do that around the topic that Seigetsu just discussed. We have kind of proposed some questions to prime the pump a little bit, but this isn't like school. You're not required to follow those questions or in that order or anything. That was just to kind of help provide a starting point. But in your breakout groups, just if there's some particular aspect that intrigues you that you'd like to dive into, if there's a question you'd like to ask of other Sangha members of how do you approach this? This is what I've found. It's kind of a free form discussion. And then what we'd love to do afterwards is kind of come back together and share a little bit from each group to the other. And again, it's very free form, no really set structure. It can be helpful to kind of designate, okay, who's going to be the one that reports back to the main group, kind of saying, well, these were the things that our group discussed. So are there any questions about that?
Cosette, we do have the cheat sheet, so to speak, with these questions on it that people can see.
Welcome back. You made it.
This one was a planned reentry.
Yeah, the planned reentry.
We're actually supposed to be here now.
Yeah, you are. Thank you, everybody, for your patience as we are, again, maneuvering the virtual world. So, again, little hiccups will happen. So now we're moving into the point to where we're actually coming back as a bigger group to have a discussion about what came up in your groups. And I don't know, each group, I have a Mokyo group, I have an Ungen group, a Katsuru group, a Teshin group, and a Zenku group. Whoever would like to go, whoever the facilitator is, or the person that was chosen to share your feedback with the group. And I can call on folks first if you want. Okay, yes, Matt, please.
So I think we quickly realized answering all of those questions in the chat was going to be quite a task, and perhaps answering them wasn't even the best idea as much as simply discussing all of them and airing some of our thoughts and feelings. Right away, the do no evil versus do no good. We talked about how we do feel even visceral reactions to those words as well as conceptual cognitive reactions, but at the same time, I use the analogy, it almost feels like they're each in their own ditch, and somewhere along the middle is really a a place perhaps to exist, in the sense that good and evil to me seems often far too relative. And if I could zoom out to 30,000 feet or fast forward in time, I would see those things very differently than I do in the moment. And so a lot of what I try and do is pull back from those ideas. And then Mokio was talking about even, trying to feel through situations instead of think through them in that non-discriminatory sense. And she also brought up a cool idea of skillful means and how to work through situations skillfully. I can't remember if it was Okamura or someone talked about digging a garden once and planting a garden, but killing the worms in the process. And it was really difficult not to do harm, even trying to do good. And so much of this to me, if I just went down the chat thing really quickly, it was the interrelation of all things and how we are always coming back to that. Compassion came up a lot in our discussion, and the depth of refuge as well. So I'm not really sure we thought a lot.
We did good. We did good.
Yes. Yeah, and there is no right or wrong. Whatever arises for the group is what needs to happen, and that's why we created the smaller groups to have space. So anything goes. So we appreciate that, and thank you, Mokio's group, for sharing, and Matt for being the one to bring it back. So
thanks for letting us get together.
Mm-hmm. Who's next? Yes, Zinko.
There we go. Greetings. This was with Hokashi and Zenku Sensei and myself, and we took a couple of the easy ones, both do no harm and how do we save all beings. We thought we'd give ourselves an easy path. So the first thing about doing no harm, the first question that came up, we said, well, where's the line? Where's that line that divides the two? I mean, for instance, what's a partly cloudy day? Is that good or bad? And we came up with a few thoughts that perhaps the line is actually in our mind. And perhaps this hinges around our intentions more than anything else, that we should get self-interest out of the way, and maybe some clarity will come in. And we also discussed the difference of whether we do no harm or we refrain from, so that the actionable piece is back on us rather than sort of an oblivious, don't do anything bad. We then found ourselves back in a different group suddenly. So then we came back to our group and we discussed how we would save all beings. And I think it was universally understood that much like in the airplane where you put your mask on first, we have to save ourselves first before we're going to be able to do much for others. And we have to clean our own house. The firefighters' motto, our lives first, and not because of selfishness, but because of condition. We can't rush into an accident if we're going to be part of the accident ourselves. We're not doing any good for anyone. But we have to make some assessments along the way, and decisions are often difficult and must be made as well. So we're trying to use the cultivation of our intentions to save all beings as our guiding principle. It's not that we're ever going to achieve that goal, but if it's within us to do what we can in all ways, we can both dispel some hidden prejudices. We can understand where our privilege may be interrupting our vows to save all beings. So we want to come back to the notion of we must do our best for all at all times. And that's about where we got, but it was a delightful discussion, and I think opened up great thoughtfulness from Seigetsu's opening comments.
Thank you, Zinko-san group. Yes, Ungan.
Our little group was Sangak, Dan, Teshin, and Kuwazan. You can get too specific with trying to do good or evil. If you get bogged down in the specifics, you have to look at the overall situation. You just can't say, well, this is right and this is wrong. You have to look at not only the immediate thing, but the after effects and side effects that can occur. And the important thing is what actions you take. It's one thing to think about all these things and philosophize about them and have breakout sections. That's great. But what's really important is what you do in your life once you get back out in the real world. Using Buddha as an example, from studying his history and how he would have done things. Saving all beings, I think we got about the same thing. It's start with yourself, and then it's a ripple effect that hopefully goes on and on. But again, the most important thing is your behavior. Tessin really had some good ideas. Good and bad varies over time. So what you might think is good today can be evil tomorrow. So you have to be real careful about getting locked into rules and rule books. But through Zazen, developing the intuition to handle situations is a basic thing that you need to work on. Here's an interesting, I've still got to think about this one, Tess, and he said that your intentions is probably not a real good way to start. It's too egocentric when you start saying, my intentions is to do this, that it's the effect that's important. Now, we could probably get a pretty good discussion about this one, Tessa, because the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? You've heard that all your life. I've heard it all my life. And this whole matter of doing good, I do believe that comes first in the sequence. You try not to do any harm, and then you try to do good. But there's more harm done trying to do good. There is good done trying not to do harm. I hope I got that in the right order. Skillful means what is still the effect that's important, the behavior and developing skillful means, but it needs to be natural. You can't run around saying, I'm going to do good. I'm not going to do bad. And I'm really locked into doing good. So I'm going to be a do-gooder. I believe one of our members used the word do-gooder. Be careful being a do-gooder. That's about all we had in overviews. It was really interesting. I wish we'd had a lot more time to go into this. So I might say when I met Roger Cochran, Seigetsu, some years ago, he was the practice leader in Jacksonville. And the first sequence I remember him doing was going through these things one at a time. Each week we would take up a new one of the things. So he's had a lot of time and practice in working out his great presentation, Roger. That's it.
Thank you, Group Ungan-san. Awesome. Thank you so much.
To your point about spending more time, we will be doing this again tomorrow. So
who's next? Yes, Tashin-san.
Our group was made up of Marie and Jisho and Kevin. Kevin, remind me again of your Dharma name. I know it starts with S, but I forget the last syllable.
Shinyo.
Shinyo, thank you. And we started with a a bit of discussion of refuge and taking of refuge, during which Jisho pointed out that it's, gives some comfort to know you have somewhere to go, where there's a sense of correctness to it. But most of our discussion was focused on harm, good and evil. Do no harm is the way it's sometimes worded. I asked the question, is it possible to do no harm? Marie shared that, when she's working in her garden, her food forest, I believe you called it, Marie, that, the Japanese beetles will come in and eat all the leaves off the fruit trees. And so how do you deal with that? You throw them in soapy water and you're killing them, which is one of the precepts that the very first precept is do not kill. And so each discussed that. Shinyo added, the idea of our intent. It's not our intent to do harm. And yet, even if we sit still, our immune system will kill thousands of bacteria and viruses. And within our culture, of course, it's very humanocentric. I haven't heard anyone bemoaning the COVID-19 virus that is being, when it's killed. I hear a lot of bemoaning when it kills one of us. It's a pizza party and this time we're the pizza. So if nothing else, our group discussed the idea that we do exist at the expense of others. And that I would add that this could be seen as a koan. This is our illogical riddle. How do we do no harm when even just sitting in Zen, our immune system is killing bacteria? And we've taken the vow, do not kill. The Buddha had this same koan, how to deal with the fact that things are unsatisfactory. And at the point of his awakening, he said, I and all beings are awakened together. That doesn't do us much good because we have not had that experience. So we're stuck with this koan where we know we are existing at the expense of others. And then we are given this challenge of using our zazen to try to settle this for ourselves. The fact that he settled it for himself is helpful, laid out a path, for us to do likewise, but it doesn't solve it for us.
Thank you, Tessin-san group. And then there was one. Yes, Ketsur-san.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Our group consisted of Walter, Ted, Amy, and myself. I didn't get any Dharma names. And I got the feeling we didn't know each other. So we spent some time saying hello and talking about where each of us were with the precepts. And it varied from perhaps getting ready to take the precepts to others who had the precepts for quite a while. And so talking generally about living with the precepts, or also the importance of finding one's own interpretation, one's own path within the precepts and within the Sangha, the importance of doing it each ourselves. And then one member, Ted, talked about towards the end, the disparity that we're always, at least this is how I understood it, the disparity that we're always dealing with between the ideals of a practice and the reality of, and the emotions that come along with it, with our outcome. It's rarely a match. So our Zazen brings us to the reality, which was also stressed by Walter, the idea of one way of working with the precepts is by doing Zazen. When we're doing Zazen, hopefully we're not breaking. I mean, I know in some ways we're breathing air, and we've had a relationship where destruction with other beings where destruction has occurred, but there is a teaching of doing Zazen where we're not breaking the precepts, or at least trying not to break them. And so I would say that's, anybody from our group want to add anything? Yeah, that's my summary. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It has been a wonderful hearing the harvesting of the different groups, bringing that information all back together into one group. So I'm going to ask Seigetsu, do you have any closing comments related to the discussion? And then what we'll do after his closing comments is do the closing Dharma verse, and then we'll go back into Zazen. But yeah, I wanted to ask Seigetsu for anything to bring us back.
Well, I want to thank everyone for participating. I particularly am appreciative of having been asked to think about this. It's an opportunity to think deeply about something that that is an ongoing part of each of our practice. But to be able to look a little more deeply into it was helpful for me. So I'm very appreciative of the opportunity of doing this. But as I've listened to the comments, I'm impressed by the thoughtfulness of each of the groups. I'm impressed about how everyone has thought about, in our attempts to do good, we may do harm, which is a conundrum, a koan maybe. And so thanks to everyone who participated and to all of the comments that we had. And I'm looking forward to Cosette's tomorrow.
I'll show everyone.